Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. As stock shortages of CPUs and graphics cards continue, it's time for an update on the market to see what the current situation is looking like and whether there will be any relief for buyers in the coming weeks. Our last video on the topic was pretty well received when we released it about a month ago. We've gotten quite a number of insights and information since then, so let's get talking. First up is the GPU market, which obviously is the big issue right now. 1 month since our last update, and the basic situation is you still can't buy a graphics card at the MSRP, which I think won't surprise anyone. There is really no firm end in sight for this issue, with many major companies including TSMC and Nvidia warning that demand will outstrip supply for much of the year. However, while companies are quick to point this out, I think it's important to note that these statements don't mean the current situation of low availability and ridiculous pricing will continue as is, unchanged for the entire year. Nvidia and AMD both expect improvements in the back half of the year, which likely will mean pricing returning closer to normal and some products with good availability. Those comments are more about product lines as a whole, and what will almost certainly happen late in 2021 is that some products will be available while others won't, as demand and manufacturing constraints differ depending on the exact product. In most regions, not much has changed in terms of actual GPU availability. On Newegg, the cheapest GPU available at anything close to the MSRP is still Nvidia's GeForce GT 1030, which again you can get for around $120. Cards from the current generation are all out of stock, and cards from prior generations like the RTX 2060 are massively price inflated, so no real change there. In other regions, we are still seeing what we talked about last time, where some GPUs are in stock and available to purchase right now, just at massively inflated prices. This will all depend on the region and the store as to what is available. As an example here at PC Case Gear, it's actually harder to find an Nvidia GPU than last we checked, while AMD's RX 6900 XT and RX 6700 XT are both available. Many retailers are preferring to distribute these products in raffles or early access deals rather than just listing them. It really depends on your local store, but again, high prices and low availability remains the reality. Since last time though, a number of people in the industry reached out to provide more information on why exactly the situation is what it is right now and why pricing is so inflated. And in the end, it can be broken up into three main areas. The first is that the AIBs themselves are continuing to either raise the actual prices on their products or maintain high prices. Basically, the situation is that while Nvidia and AMD can set an MSRP for a particular line of GPUs, let's say the RTX 3070 with its $500 US MSRP, the AIBs then have their own MSRP for their custom board partner versions. As demand remains very high, AIBs are not interested in profits going to the scalper market, so they are progressively raising their AIB MSRPs over time. I'm not going to name any specific AIBs, but we have heard from several retailers that some brands are much more aggressive at raising MSRPs than others, and often the prices that you see on a retailer's website aren't some crazy retailer inflated price, but the actual official price for those cards in that region as set by the AIB. You might check back a week later and the prices have gone up. Well, that's almost certainly due to the AIBs raising the MSRP once again for the latest batch of stock. Often these price hikes only apply to higher end models within a family. So say an Asus Strix OC model versus an Asus Dual model, which keeps the appearance that some models are affordable because the lower tier cards aren't subject to the same hikes. If you check on PC Case Gear, for example, the Dual is listed at 1,239 Australian dollars out of stock, while the Strix OC is $1,659. So that's quite a massive price discrepancy. But then when it comes to actually supplying the GPUs, AIBs would only produce these super high-end cards at the new inflated prices and not supply any models at the low end. Of course, this makes total sense from an AIB perspective. They want to maximize profits, and one way to do that is to exclusively produce the highest end variants which they can sell for the highest price. This is likely to continue while demand outstrips supply to a significant extent. In fact, some lower end models have basically just been discontinued entirely, as AIBs have indicated that they just won't make them, which has caused havoc for retailers that offered pre-orders. If a ton of people pre-ordered a card that then becomes discontinued, the retailer is in a bit of strife, which is why pre-orders on these products aren't really available across the vast majority of retailers. The risk is just too high that the card may not exist or may be more expensive to buy when it actually comes time to procure the stock. The second issue is at the distributor level. While distributors aren't necessarily raising prices on AIB cards themselves in every instance, they are causing issues for retailers through a system called bundling. This is where if a retailer wants to purchase a GPU from a distributor, the distributor only makes that GPU available if they also buy a ton of hard-to-move components in other segments. One thing we have commonly heard from several retailers is that if they want to buy, say, a single new graphics card, they may be required to buy something like 50 A520 motherboards as well in a bundle. If they can't then sell those motherboards, this puts a burden on the retailers and may lead them to increase the GPU price to offset the losses they're being forced to take in accepting other components as part of the bundle deal. This is also why you see many deals at retailers where you can buy a graphics card bundled with some other component like a motherboard, storage, power supply, or cooler. It's because retailers have to buy those components in order to actually get the graphics card, as a cheeky way for the distributors to palm off unwanted stock to retailers and cash in, putting the burden on the retailers. This issue alone is the source of immense frustration from every retailer we've spoken to. These bundle deals can take different forms depending on the exact distributor a retailer is working with. Some bundle graphics cards exclusively with their in-house pre-built PC options, which retailers would then resell as entire systems under their own brand. Obviously, that reduces the amount of cards for the normal retail channel. Some are providing a mixture of bundle deals and standalone products, but significantly inflating the pricing on the standalone cards to incentivize the bundle deals. Some are providing fair prices without bundles, but are extremely limited in quota, although this is less common than the other methods of providing GPU stock. One retailer even told us that these bundle deals are getting more extravagant over time, with distributors attempting to package in more and more expensive motherboards or hard drives or whatever in successive months. Unfortunately, we have still been unable to find anyone at a distributor that wants to talk with us about GPU supply, so we don't have any comments from their side of the story, but the situation we are hearing from multiple parties, whether that's retailers, AIBs, or even the GPU companies themselves, is that distributors are playing a role in making it harder for everyday consumers to purchase a GPU through these tactics, and profiting in the process. One person we spoke to shared their disappointment that GPU buyers are paying ridiculous prices at retail, but those inflated prices aren't trickling down to the actual GPU designers who do the hardest work and could invest that in next generation products. So at this point, we've talked about AIBs continuing to raise their official prices for graphics cards above the official Nvidia and AMD MSRPs, and distributors bundling graphics cards with other products as the two major sources of inflated graphics card pricing right now. But there's also a third issue, and that's genuine supply chain issues that are ongoing. We touched on this a bit last time, but everyone in this space is still being supply constrained. That is to say, supply is unable to meet demand due to various reasons. We don't mean supply is below a normal level in a normal market because products are flying off the shelves at record rates, at revenue is at an all-time high. Rather, supply is constrained and limiting this demand from being met. The current issues are basically the same as before. As a recap, fabs are limited on the number of chips they can supply, so both TSMC supplying AMD and Samsung supplying Nvidia cannot produce any more GPUs than they currently are. That's just life. On top of this, there are ongoing issues with raw material supply, substrates, GDDR memory, and some other components that are all part of the graphics card manufacturing process. In short, graphics cards are more complex and require more components than something like a CPU, so they are more susceptible to supply chain problems. Graphics card manufacturers continue to tell us that component supply is slowly improving but still well short of where it needs to be, and this is being compounded by logistics issues like increased freight costs, as a lot of freight carriers are prioritizing vaccine supply, and tariffs depending on the region. Now you might be wondering, okay, well, you talked about 3 issues, but none of those problems are mining. How do those pesky miners factor into this equation? Can't we just get angry at the miners? And this is partially true, but mining is still just one part of a very complex situation right now. The reality is that mining is simply increasing demand, which is putting pressure on all the other areas of the supply chain and causing reactions like inflated AIB pricing and distributor shenanigans. Despite all of these considerations and concerns, the overall GPU market has actually improved slightly compared to when we last checked. It may not appear that way at first glance. You still can't buy a GPU at a reasonable price, which is what everyone is waiting for, but in general, there are some small signs that we're on the road to recovery, so let's work through them. Last time that we checked in on the scalper market, which is where we get a true idea of GPU pricing and what people are willing to pay, GPU pricing was relatively flat over a 1-month period. However, that also coincided with a relatively flat period for cryptocurrency growth. So the thinking there was, well, crypto prices aren't rising, lots of people use these cards for mining, so that isn't necessarily going to increase GPU demand and pricing if crypto pricing is flat. For today's video, I've looked at GPU pricing over the past week and compared that to a similar period 1 month ago for all of the current generation GPUs. This is from completed eBay listings for brand new graphics cards in the US market. Once again, we see a trend that's relatively flat month on month. So for roughly 2 months now, we have basically been at the peak of GPU pricing on the scalper market. The good news to share here is that firstly, GPU prices are not rising and haven't been over a consistent period now. This is evidence that the limit on what buyers are willing to pay for a new GPU has been reached. And the amount extra that buyers are willing to spend on a GPU does vary between models. NVIDIA GPUs in particular are much more inflated than AMD. The RTX 3070, for example, is currently selling at 180% above MSRP, or 2.8 times its $500 MSRP at around $1,400 on the scalper market on average. For cards with the weakest supply, the RTX 3080 and RTX 3060 Ti, you're looking at paying at least triple right now. But again, that price hasn't significantly risen over the last few months, aside from the virtually non-existent 3060 Ti. Meanwhile, AMD GPUs range from being double the price to about 2.3 times as expensive. The 6700 XT has even dropped in price by 17%, comparing just after its launch a month ago to now, a byproduct of actually decent 6700 XT supply, while the 6900 XT is sitting at a relatively modest 81% price inflation, which doesn't sound great but is lower than every other current generation GPU. This means that buyers actually willing to pay a scalper price are far better off buying a Radeon GPU than GeForce. The 6700 XT in particular is destroying the RTX 3070's value right now, not just in the scalper market but also at retail with a number of cards. The average price for the 6700 XT is $967 compared to $1,400 for the RTX 3070, making the 3070 45% more expensive for just 5% more gaming performance on average based on our performance testing. Other comparisons are also in favor of AMD. The RX 6800 is currently a little bit cheaper than the RTX 3070 despite offering 13% higher frame rates on average at 1440p. Similar for the RX 6800 XT versus RTX 3080. The average scalper price for NVIDIA's GPU is 47% higher, despite offering almost identical performance. In games, that is, not in mining, which I don't know how these cards perform and frankly don't care. Now, I'm not saying to go out and pay these insane GPU prices on eBay, but it is an interesting look at what people are actually paying right now for GPUs. We have heard that AMD supply is slowly improving, and that does seem to be having flow-on effects in this market, where Radeon offers significantly better value for those that are desperate and are willing to pay inflated prices. The price hikes on GeForce GPUs right now are absolutely disgusting, and while I couldn't recommend people pay these prices on Radeon GPUs either, you definitely shouldn't pay nearly 3 times the MSRP on a GeForce GPU. But the really promising thing here is that GPU prices have remained steady despite monthly growth in the crypto market. I'm not a crypto expert, so I did have to do a more than the zero research I normally do into the crypto market, but the trends are pretty clear. While Bitcoin was relatively flat month over month in the period I looked at, Ethereum, a highly popular coin for mining on GPUs, is up 24%. And then across the CoinDesk 20, which they describe as the top 20 assets in the crypto market, with roughly 99% of the market by volume, the average month-on-month increase for these coins was 41%. Some coins were flat, some declined slightly, some saw significant growth, but on average, the growth was 41%. Of course, this does change over time with the highly volatile nature of the crypto market, but this was the case over the same period I used for the GPU sales information. So the takeaway here is that despite crypto continuing to climb in value, luckily at a more modest rate than the explosion we saw in the first 2 months of the year, GPU prices have not increased with the market. The average cryptocurrency gain was 41%, while the scalper GPU market actually saw a slight price reduction month on month. It's not the big crash in GPU prices that people want, but it is a positive sign. Again, this doesn't really provide us with any insights into when GPU pricing will return to normal, but for now we're mostly just interested in short-term trends. Are GPU prices flat, Are they increasing or are they decreasing? Flat or downward trends are what we're looking for, while an increase would of course be disastrous. So that's basically where the GPU market stands. Now it's time to talk about the CPU market. This should be relatively straightforward as there has been a lot of improvement here compared to when we talked about it last month. The big change to this market has been the introduction of Intel's 11th generation Rocket Lake processors. While not all of these processors were well received, the Core i9 11900K in particular we described as garbage, Intel does offer a lot of value and performance in the low end of the market. Chips like the Core i5 11400F and the previous generation Core i5 10400F remain the best value processors on the market for gamers, and both are readily available across major retailers. In what is great news for DIY system builders, demand for Intel's 11th gen parts is quite low, according to discussions we've had with retailers. This means we didn't see the usual rush of sales around a product's launch, which usually cause inflated pricing and low availability. Instead, most 11th gen parts you can pick up right now at the MSRP, or in some cases at a discount. The Core i7 11700K has actually dropped from $420 to $400 on Newegg, and you'll see similar slight discounts on a few other CPUs in their freshly released line. While 10th generation Comet Lake processors are effectively discontinued at this point, they too remain reasonably available. The Core i9 10850K, Core i7 10700KF, and Core i5 10400F, just to name a few, are all available at decent prices or discounts, with a part like the 8-core 10700KF priced at just $300, the same as AMD's 6-core Ryzen 5 5600X. That sort of value and competition is making the CPU market quite strong right now, with good availability on the Intel side. The one exception to this appears to be the Core i9 11900K surprisingly, which despite its poor reception is hard to find and being sold at inflated prices. Bit of a baffling one given it's the worst of the lineup, but in any case, the CPUs you might actually want to buy and those you should buy are all available, so it might be a good time to consider a CPU upgrade. On the AMD side, whether supply has improved will depend heavily on your region. In the United States, it's a similar story to what we told previously. The Ryzen 7 5800X is readily available at its $450 MSRP, while the cheaper Ryzen 5 5600X is touch and go for availability at its $300 MSRP. They're available at Micro Center at that price, for example, but you're looking at a price premium on Newegg, so it depends. Older CPUs in AMD's lineup like the Ryzen 5 3600 and Ryzen 7 2700X continue to be sold at basically their original launch price from years ago, if not higher, which makes them poor value compared to Intel. That situation won't change until the 5600X stabilizes or AMD release a newer, cheaper Zen 3 part in the sub $300 price range. In the United States, you'll probably find it hard to buy either of AMD's Ryzen 9 processors, the 5900X or 5950X, with most retailers not having enough stock. But what we are hearing is that supply is improving quite a bit for these parts and should be decent within a few months. Here in Australia, for example, you can pre-order a 5900X with an ETA of just 1 week from now, whereas last month, the final launch day orders were still being fulfilled. In fact, in some regions, the Ryzen 9 5950X and 5900X, for example, have gone from unavailable to available over the last month. Overclockers in the UK currently have a small amount of stock, while Mindfactory can ship you any of AMD's Ryzen 5000 processors, including a tray version of the 5600X. Based on this, it honestly shouldn't be too long until the CPU market has fully stabilized, and I'd expect that in next month's stock update that we're looking at a relatively healthy CPU market compared to what we've dealt with over the last few months. This might have flow-on effects for other products as well, especially on the AMD side. If they are able to meet demand for Ryzen 5000 desktop processors, then over time they should be able to allocate any excess 7nm supply from TSMC to other lower stock products, whether that's graphics cards or APUs. It could also open the door for a Ryzen 5 5600 type product if AMD wants to go down that path and challenge Intel's current lead in the budget CPU market. And it's honestly quite refreshing to talk about CPUs in this way because availability for new products like Ryzen 5000 has been awful considering those chips launched in November of last year. The market isn't great, but it does appear to be recovering, and that's good news for people wanting a system upgrade. Unfortunately, it won't help GPU buyers too much, but that's the next issue to be tackled. Anyway, that's it for our look at the CPU and GPU markets for April of 2021. We will be back with another update in May to see what's changed. We're going to be tracking GPU prices a little bit, so we'll be able to tell you whether they are going up, staying flat, going down. We all want them to go down, so let's hope next month we have some good news to share. If you're interested interested in supporting the channel, you can of course follow the links in the description to our Floatplane and Patreon pages, where you'll get access to things like our monthly live streams, Discord community, behind the scenes videos, all that sort of stuff. So thanks to everyone that does support us there. And yeah, that's it for this one. I'll catch you in the next one.